Hi everybody, it's Leanne. I'm here to talk about class activity 89 and 90. So we are still talking about the beginning of chapter 5. We're extending multiplication to fractions. This is part 2. This class activity goes fairly quickly. I'm going to go through most of it, not the very last couple problems because they're pretty redundant, and I think you can just apply what we did here to see how you did on those. All right, in this first one, we're looking at grams of sugar in a serving of juice. And so in this serving of juice, in one single serving, we have 12 grams of juice. And our question is about how many grams of sugar are in a fourth of a serving. And so if we just remember back to what we're doing when we multiply, or our definition of multiplication, we have our number of groups. So here is our number of groups. And when it's not a whole number like this, it might seem a little bit confusing, but we still have a fourth of a group is our number of groups. And then 12 grams is the amount in each group. All right, so because that's the amount of sugar in one whole serving. So that's what we're looking at here, 1/4 times 12. So if I look at the diagram, this whole thing is 12 grams. And if I partition it into fourths, then I know that each equal section would be 3 grams. So we know that a quarter of a serving is 3 grams. You might be thinking, well, isn't that the same as 12 divided by 4? Yes, it is in fact, because of course 12 divided by 4, or dividing by 4, is the exact same thing as multiplying by a fourth. So that's a connection that we always want students to come up with, and this diagram, or using a math diagram such as this, can help lead them to that understanding on their own. In the next problem, you are asked to write a problem of your own that would illustrate 1/3 times 15. I'm going to write a problem about cake because I'm in quarantine with my teenage daughter who is baking. Well, I guess we're both baking up a storm. So it seems like an appropriate problem. We're going to look at one serving of cake as having 15 grams of fat. And I'm going to use this diagram to help us make sense of 1/3 of 15, or 1/3 times 15. So again, 1/3 is our number of groups, and 15 is the amount in each group, or in one group. All right, so if I have 15 grams and I partition it into thirds, then I know that each third is 5. So 1/3 of 15 is 5. And you're probably thinking, well, that's just like dividing by 3. And you're right, it is, because dividing by 3, just like we saw up here, is the same as multiplying by 1/3. All right, so now let's talk about looking at a fraction multiplied by a fraction. And so in this case, we're looking at cheese, and our serving size is 8/3 ounces. And we're looking at how many ounces are in a fourth of a serving. So I'm going to write our problem over here because we're finding a fourth of 8/3. And a fourth is our number of groups, and our 8/3 is the size of one of our groups. So there's a couple different ways we can look at this. And before we just jump to multiplying straight across, I want us to make sense of this with reasoning. If we have 8/3 here, and I've partitioned this in fourths, then I know that each of these fourths must be 2/3, because 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 is 8/3. So I know that a fourth of a serving is 2/3 of an ounce. If I just multiply straight across, like you're all familiar with, I end up with 8/12 before, of course, I simplify and then get 2/3. But this is a nice way to reason through that correct answer of 2/3. All right, the last one that we're going to do is looking at a serving size of 1/5 of a liter. So this is another juice problem. And we want to know how many liters are in 1/3 of a serving. So This is really interesting because a serving is only a fifth of a liter. Remember, a liter is in, I guess, in comparison to like a quart size-ish. And so we're looking at a third of a fifth of that liter. So we're looking at the number of groups being a third, and we know that the size of each group, the size of one group or one serving, is a fifth of a liter. So this is what we're doing, is we're taking a third of a fifth. Before we just multiply straight across, let's look at our drawing and see if we can make sense of this with reasoning. If this strip that I've drawn is a fifth, then I want you to kind of imagine what it would look like if we showed one whole liter, right? So it's obviously going to extend off the page. So this is 1/5, this would be 2/5, this would be 3/5, and hopefully you can imagine how long this strip is going to extend. And the reason I'm talking about that is because students might then think about common denominators. And if they think about common denominators in this case, then we can look at each of these. Since each of these fifths we could partition into thirds, then we would essentially then have 15, I'm hoping that you follow me here, 15 partitions in this 1 liter. So then each of these thirds of a serving is actually a 15th of a liter. All right, and if you're not quite understanding that, I would suggest trying to draw that whole liter out. So here's the whole 1 serving, which is a fifth of a liter. But then if you draw the whole liter out, you can see that a third of a fifth is actually a 15th of a liter. Okay, now the last part of this is to compare a third times a fifth versus a fifth times a third. So like you're, of course, aware, both of these are going to have the same product. In both cases, we're going to have a product of a 15th. But where are they different? And they're different because of the definition of multiplication that we're going to rely on. Here, again, we're talking about the number of groups. So in this case, our number of groups was a third of a serving, whereas our 1/5 was the size of the serving, of 1 serving. In this example, our number of groups is a fifth, but our size of our serving would be a third. So if we were to sort of reword this problem using a fifth times a third, then our 1 serving would be a third of a liter, and we would be trying to find a fifth of a serving. All right, so like I said, the last 2 problems on the class activity are very similar to this one right here. So if you need to rewatch this section just to make sure that you get that, then do so. Appreciate you guys watching and keeping up on this new online world that we have going. All right, keep staying safe and take care.